As I was sitting down to record the start of the Beaux Stratagem, talking about that play, it was so windy outside I had to come out and show you. This is in my garden, and years ago as a kid I saw a film called High Wind in Jamaica, and there was this scene of a tree, well it's actually a palm tree, being buffeted by the wind, and this just reminds me of that. It's so windy, but beautiful weather. Whoa, look at that. You've got to beat a tree like this in. Being knocked about by the wind. Being knocked about by the winds of fate, is appropriate to what I'm reading. It's one of the 5 plays in here. A couple of I've heard of. I don't think I've ever read any of them. But this is the Beaux Stratagem, a comedy. Look at that wonderful font. You can tell it's from the 18th century as soon as you see it. So the Beaux Stratagem is a play that is typical of the era, although the plays of the era were beginning to alter. So from the time of King William into Queen Anne onwards, the theatre was beginning to change, and that wind now has turned to rain and sleet. You can probably hear it. Unbelievable spring weather. Wow. Can you hear that? It's suddenly gone very dark. Sorry, I'm going to talk about this Beaux Stratagem. I might have to turn on a light. There's a prologue at the beginning here, which is interesting because it sets in time when the Beaux Stratagem was written. It's typical of the era. It says, Great Britain, when Anna's sceptre points the laws their course. Well, that's Queen Anne. There scarce is room for satire. All our lays must be or songs of triumph or of praise. So it's talking about, at the time of Queen Anne, it became very bombastic and very nationalistic to be saying how wonderful Great Britain was. There was this sense of, we're going places. Nature's favourite plant, a fool. A weed that has to 20 summers ran, shoots up in stalk and vegetates to man. That's my dyspraxia coming through, dyslexia. And thanks to nature, there's no want of those. For rain or shine, the thriving coxcomb grows. Fools are made for jests to men of sense. That was supposedly to be said at the beginning of the play. There is also an epilogue. What is it about? Effectively, it's about how people are confined as prisoners, either in marriage or by the times because they don't have enough money. They may even be a prisoner. There is one prisoner, a French gentleman. He's not French, he speaks French. He's actually from what we now call Belgium. And they're all confined and they all want to find comfort in love or get out of love or get a husband to notice them because they think they're a wife who's bored with the sottish husband and so on. And it tends to be 2 people talking at any one time with a third possibly coming back and forth, so like a maidservant or a butler. But the names are really good. So there's 2 men we first meet called Aimwell and Archer. And what they are doing is that they are out of luck. They got money, but they're starting to run out of it. And when you read these plays from this era, a lot of it is that nobody ever seems to have enough money. So they leave London. And that's notable because a lot of plays up until this point were set in London. And this bucks that trend, and it puts it out into the provinces, a place called Lichfield. And these 2 men, they're not married, they're young, and they just want to go and wench and debauch and get drunk as long as the money lasts. And when it runs out, they know that they're going to have to ship over to the continent, and sign up to fight in the wars of the Spanish succession, which was taking place in Europe, which is why I think we have a French prisoner. And they may never come back. So they're going to make merry while they can. And they go through to all these provincial towns. And in one of them takes the role of a master and the other one takes the role of a servant. And then when they get to the next town, they swap and so on. But in Lichfield, it happens to be that Ainwell is the master and Archer is the servant. And I've got this creaky chair again. Then you've got... they're in an inn, and we come across a character who's not a butterball, Lord of the Rings character, the prancing pony. This is more like the innkeeper in Les Miserables. Thin, wiry, and is on the lookout to steal the money from the two men. And we quickly find out that he's part of a group of, how do we put it, thieves, rogues. There's a guy, a highwayman, Gibbet he's called, who comes in and he tells the audience that he has a watch on all the roads, which they would have done. They knew everybody who was moving up and down country who they could prey upon. And then there's two ladies, and again, great names. There's a Sullen, a Mrs. Sullen, who's bored with her husband. She feels though she's a prisoner. And her sister-in-law. And they're trying to get the sottish husband to pay attention to his wife by making out that the wife's having an affair with the French prisoner. And then there is like a guy called, what's his name? Is it Scrub? He's a servant who then fancies somebody else. And then the innkeeper's got a daughter called Cherry. And it's just... for the time of the play, you get a feeling of what it would have been like for people to be living in the provinces and the pros and cons of that, and how women were treated and the men behaving badly. And it's a morality tale in which the playwright is trying to say, there's all these problems and how does it resolve itself at the end of the play and so on. But it's really well done. And there's a lot of slang. And from the very beginning, when the two, I wouldn't say they're the main characters, but the two first characters we see, Ainwell and Archer, turn up. And they're doing a lot of asides and talking to each other and so on. And Cherry comes along and says, very welcome, gentlemen. Chamberlain, I don't know who she's talking to. Show the Lion and the Rose. Well, you think, what is the Lion and the Rose? Well, it's the rooms in the inn. And that was quite typical of the era, but of course, we don't do that anymore. That phrase has gone. Much is mentioned about Lichfield. Now, Lichfield is in Staffordshire, I believe. It's not far from where I grew up, and it was very provincial. And it was well known for very strong ale, and it's referenced here. The Boniface, the innkeeper, is very proud of the ale, and he says, in my cellar, 10 ton of the best ale in Staffordshire. 'Tis smooth as oil, sweet as milk, clear as amber, and strong as brandy, and will be just 14-year-old the 5th day of next March in style. 14-year-old ale. Blimey, but like tar. And then you've got this wry humour that occasionally comes up. And of the plays that I have read, and they tend to be of an earlier age, the earlier age had a lot more witticism and puts down and sarcasm. This one doesn't so much, but it does raise us up again occasionally. So if you know the older style plays of the Restoration and compare to this, things are starting to become a bit more sedate and a bit more typical. A lot of prose words speaking, but there isn't that much ribaldry compared to the older plays. And that would continue throughout the 1700s into the Victorian era especially. There is a possible reason for that. Of course, with the plays and the Restoration, a lot of people made money by writing plays, but as we get into the 1700s, towards the end, people were making more money through writing the novels. So they were less inclined to do plays. So that by the 1900s, nearly all people writing were doing it as novels rather than plays. Interesting. But there's a little thing here about the wry humour. There's a lady character called Lady Bountiful, and she's like one of these provincial healers, who makes tonics and herbal remedies. And Boniface, the innkeeper, is talking about her and says she cures rheumatisms, ruptures, and broken shins in men, green sickness, obstructions, and fits of the mother in women. Fits of the mother, not sure what that is. The king's evil, chin cough, and chilblains in children. In short, she has cured more people in and about Lichfield within 10 years than the doctors have killed in 20. And that's a bold word. Don't go to the doctor in Lichfield then if you're ill. So you get a little insight into the canting crew here, which I've talked about before. And they are the ones that would be the highwaymen and the thieves. Priggers, Abraham men they were called. Upright men. As Archer says to Ameswell, my dear brother in iniquity, 'tis still my maxim that there is no scandal like rags, nor any crime so shameful as poverty. And there's a lot of poverty in this era, so a lot of shame. And Amel says, the world confesses it every day in its practice, though men won't own it for their opinion. In other words, people knew of the poverty, weren't going to do anything about it. And there is an explicit use of canting names here, which I think you would see carrying into the novels later, of a much later age of Dickens. So there's Jack Handicraft, Lady Manslaughter, Nick Marrowbone, compared to, say, Jack Generous, who was a stock character for someone with money. There is no crime upon earth but the want of money. So people are trying to get money. And Ameswell and Archer, who turn up first, they've got this case, this little box, which they say to Boniface, the owner, can you look after this? It's got £200 in it. Well, Boniface, who's part of a gang who is trying to defraud his customers, instantly thinks, oh, £200, I'll have that. So he ropes in his daughter, Cherry, who is very aptly named Cherry. To pop your cherry is an old English idiom for meaning a woman for the first time losing her virginity. So I don't know if I'm correct, but the use of the word cherry sets in people's mind what this young girl is. And he says, we have heads to get money and hearts to spend it. And there's this wonderful scene where Cherry comes to see her father, who then says he orders her to get to know this manservant, this gentleman that's just arrived, the Archer character, with the aim of finding out more about them. And he even gives the lie that she should sleep with him. And she turns around and said, what a rogue is my father. He will betray his guest and debauch his daughter into the bargain, by a footman too. So it's typical of the era. Men would even prostitute their own daughters to get some coin. And certainly that's what the play is putting across. And she's the first woman we come across. It sets the scene for the rest of the play. But there are two ladies in there, Mrs. Solon and, is it Dora? Dorinda. Dorinda is the sister-in-law whose brother Mrs. Solon is married to. And they go back and forth trying to use the French prisoner, the officer, so that her husband gets jealous and hopefully starts showing a bit of interest in the wife. She says, there's no form of prayer in the liturgy against bad husbands. There's an extensive thing here I'd like to read out, and it's from Mrs. Solon. And she's talking about, really, it often comes across, I've seen it in Pride and Prejudice in the TV series from the 90s, in which women have to put up with sottish, boorish men who they have to marry. But we don't really get to think about or see what those men are like when they're coming home drunk. But you get that in this play. So this is the wife, Mrs. Solon, saying, "Since a woman must wear chains," talking about that prisoner kind of thing, fetters, "I would have the pleasure of hearing them rattle a little. Now you shall see, but take this by the way." And then she talks about the husband. "He came home this morning at his usual hour of 4, wakened me out of a sweet dream of something else by tumbling over the tea table, which he broke all to pieces. After his man and he had rolled about the room like sick passengers in a storm, he comes flouncing into bed, dead as a salmon into a fishermonger's basket. His feet cold as ice, his breath hot as a furnace, and his hands and his face as greasy as his flannel nightcap. Oh, matrimony! He tosses up the clothes with a barbarous swing over his shoulders, disorders the whole economy of my bed, leaves me half naked, and my whole night's comfort is the tunable serenade of that wakeful nightingale, his nose. Oh, the pleasure of counting the melancholy clock by a snoring husband." Great. And that's just the wordplay, the type of wordplay you get in throughout all of this. There's also something here that as soon as I read it, I couldn't help thinking of Jane Austen. Aimswell is talking to Archer. Now, Aimswell was the first we come across. He's pretending to be the master. And he says, "Phew, no woman can be a beauty without a fortune." Great stuff. And just to finish off, because I don't want to give away the ending, the French count, the Comte, he's the one who really says through his words what I think it's all about. He says, and he's courting, well, he thinks he's courting Mrs. Solon, and Mrs. Solon is using him to get her own husband jealous. And he says, "Madam, I am doubly a prisoner. First to the arms of your general, then to your more conquering eyes. My first chains are easy. There a ransom may redeem me, but from your fetters I never shall set free." And Mrs. Solon replies, "Alas, sir, why should you complain to me of your captivity, who am in chains myself? I am like you, a prisoner of war indeed. I have given my parole of honour. Would you break yours to gain your liberty?" So it's holding up a mirror to that era in which women and men felt prisoners because of the traditions and the confines of society that has been placed on them. And that would take centuries to get rid of, if at all. The women have to maintain their modesty, otherwise they'll be considered whores, sluts. Then the men are always trying to take away their modesty. And if they are married, the husbands often turn away and look elsewhere. And that is the common theme throughout these kind of plays. Can you say that that is the same today? Yes. But the wit is something I really do enjoy. It's this commonplace little scenes in which the playwright will often get a good turn of words and phrases, and it's just quite amusing. So, really enjoyable. Glad I found this. The Beaux Stratagem. I've got about 2 pages to finish. It's just winding up the story. And I thought I'd tell you about it. Thanks for listening.